Hello and welcome! It is Vintage Super League time once again. I'm Randy Bueller, joined by very special guest, Andy Markiton. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Hey, thanks for having me, Randy. Hello, everybody.
Now, I see a certain something behind you. That looks a lot like an original art Black Lotus. That's your prize from winning the Vintage tournament at Eternal Weekend a couple of weeks ago, yeah?
That's right. Yep. Looks pretty good, huh?
It is gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Man,
Yeah.
Congratulations on just a hell of a run for you. And I was delighted to just get you here on the show. You're going to hang out through the end of the first round. We'll talk, let the people get to know you a little bit. How does it feel? You know, it's been a couple weeks now. What, it was 3 weeks ago? Has it sunk in yet that you actually pulled that off?
Yeah, I think it's still sinking in a little bit. I've been just incredibly busy since coming home with work and family commitments. But yeah, every once in a while, I just I look up and I go, "Holy catfish!" It's so hard to believe, but yeah, just a surreal, wonderful feeling.
All right, so I want you to introduce yourself a little bit because I know some people know who you are. Most people probably know you as Montolio, which is your username on Magic Online, where you just keep putting up undefeated league deck lists, good finishes, usually with a shops deck, but not exclusively. So other than the fact, okay, you're Montolio, and we can put a face to the name, who are you?
Yeah, that's a nice introduction. Thanks, Randy. Yeah, basically, my name's Andy Markiton, and a lot of people know me as Montolio from Magic Online, and I live in Toronto. And I'm the lucky father of two beautiful girls. I have an 8-year-old daughter by the name of Hannah and a 5-year-old daughter by the name of Taylor.
Very nice.
Yeah, my grandfather always said, "A man is rich that has daughters," and I couldn't agree with him more. And yeah, I work as a nurse practitioner, so I'm in primary healthcare. I've been doing that for about 20 years now, and yeah, hobby-wise, outside of Magic, I'm very much into hockey. Go Leafs, go! And
Toronto sounds right.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I also very much enjoy long distance running. Back in another lifetime, I used to run a fair amount of marathons, etc. So wow. I still try and stay active. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Now, talk to us about your relationship with Magic. You've been playing for quite a while, but haven't been competitive for the whole time. Is that right?
Yeah, I think like most Magic players, you started at the kitchen table at some point. I've been playing since Ice Age. A friend of mine bought a couple starter decks back in the day, and he showed them to me. And of course, I was right into fantasy books back in those days, and right away I just gravitated to it. I'm like, "Holy catfish, this is going to be a great game." And yeah, really, that's where it all began for me. I've never put the cards down ever since I picked them up, and I played for several years anyways, up until Urza Sega, when unfortunately somebody took my collection from me at that pre-release tournament, and I'm like, that's going to be the end of Magic for me type thing. And long story short, about a year later, Magic Online came out, and that's really where my story begins. Is shortly after the beta came to fruition, I started playing, and I think I picked up Extended, which then cascaded into Classic format, which was really the prelude for waiting for Vintage to come online. So
it's funny. Most people probably went from Extended to Modern, but you played, so Classic, you mentioned the Classic format. I don't know how many people even remember this, but Classic was the format on Magic Online where you could play every card that had ever been published on Magic Online. They hadn't published all the cards at that point. So this is before Vintage Masters came out. So there were no Moxes, but it was kind of the closest you could get to Vintage on Magic Online, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was a broken format. Of course, not as powerful as Vintage because we're missing the Mox and the Power 9. But, we had Mishra's Workshops, and we had, Yawgmoth's Will and Bargain, unrestricted Library of Alexandria, believe it or not. It sounds really ludicrous now, but 4 Brainstorms. So it was kind of a really powerful format. We had our own banned and restricted list on it, and I remember at one point when Vintage was coming in, I was so connected to Classic. I'm like, oh, I'm really going to miss it when it leaves. And of course, I've never looked back once we had Vintage. So
yeah, Vintage Masters came out. You switched from Classic to Vintage. And yeah. I mean, the rest is just history. I mean, how does the story play out from there?
Yeah, it's kind of a cool story. I remember I don't know, maybe it was 6 months into Vintage's birth online, and it was my first time in 2014. I was watching Twitch at Champs, and I'm like, oh, this is just so cool. And I remember seeing Roland Chang on camera and think, of course I knew about Roland. I'd been following Vintage for years on the mana drain, and I'm like, yeah, I want to do that one day. And which led to 2015 for me, where it was at that moment when I watched Roland, I'm like, okay, that's it, I'm buying in. And shortly thereafter, I had picked up all the power, and I made my debut into paper at the NYSE actually in 2015, and which was a really cool experience. Big transition, being predominantly a moto only player for the last 12 years, moving into paper. A lot to learn with reference to paper management, and just to something as simple as sitting across the table from somebody, talking to you when you're in your deep thoughts of, trying to figure your lines out, was an interesting thing for me. But anyways, yeah, I went out to the NYSE and Champs in 2015 for my first time. And despite I didn't put up great numbers, I would consider it a successful foray into paper. I definitely was in the winning bracket at both of those tournaments, but it fell a little bit short. And which cascaded into 2016, where I had a tremendously good year. I went to the NYSE again, and I was fortunate enough to win that tournament. I think there was someone in the chat could probably correct me, but that was a fair-sized tournament. I think 175 people at that one.
Yeah, that one's always big.
Great tournament run by Nick Detweiler, for those who are unfamiliar with it. But
we've had him on VSL a little bit. So
yeah, for sure.
Let me see if I understand this right. 3 years ago, you're watching Eternal Weekend on Twitch, and you're like, I want to go do that. You buy into Paper Vintage. You show up 1 year, make your debut. Then the next year, you make top 8. Then the year after that, which is 3 weeks ago, you win the whole thing. That's impressive. Yep. That is a hell of a run.
Yeah.
That is spectacular. And I know that you've hooked on with a pretty good team of Vintage regulars, right? Do you want to talk about who you worked with preparing for this Eternal Weekend 3 weeks ago?
Yeah, I basically this time around, I mean, I've been on this list for, approximately about a year or so. There wasn't a whole lot of work to put into it, but Rich Shea and I spent a good couple hours, 2 to 3 hours one night, kind of going through the nuances of the flex slots in the deck, and really hammered out the main deck and the sideboard. And it was I mean, for those of you who are unaware, it was kind of a neat story, because Rich and I met in the finals of Eternal Weekend in Vintage, which was basically the double beam dream. So it was Rich and I also need to give a nod out to Will McGrin as another guy who's been putting up tremendous numbers with the aggro Overseer Workshop deck, and so we talked throughout the year as well with it. But
right. So the winning list was a Workshop decks. I think most people know that. 5 Workshop decks in the top 8. You play your teammate in the finals in basically a mirror match. I do want to pick your brain a little bit about what you think of the state of Shops decks in Vintage right now. Like, is the deck too good? Are people not sideboarding against it appropriately? Do people just need to adjust to the fact that it's an aggro creature swarm deck? Or where do you think the deck is at in your mind?
Yeah, I think we've all seen through the internet over the last 3 weeks that there's been a lot of people crying for restrictions and workshops because of the presence of shops in the top 8. And there were 5 shops decks and 3 oath decks in the top 8. And so there's been a lot of fallout over that. And, I don't know if people have been paying attention to the statistics that Matt Murray and Ryan Eberhardt put up every single week.
I do. They're great.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's great data. And, the reality is that Workshops really has struggled significantly. And I think it struggled before Champs a little bit, and certainly post Champs. The Xerox decks are looking like the top dog right now. I believe in the last 3 Power 9 challenges, and don't quote me on this, but I believe there's only been the presence of 1 or 2 shop decks cumulative in those top 8s. And I can certainly speak from my own experience that, I've been, getting it handed to me, for lack of a better term. Like, I played in the Power 9 challenge the other day, and, I I was playing against a UR Delver deck, and it was or Rug Delver deck, and it was like a guy had main deck Ancient Grudges and Shattering Sprees and Lightning Bolts, and I mean they're just a tremendous beating for workshops. You know, there was
am I allowed to say? Am I allowed to say good?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, look at it. I was talking to somebody earlier today, and you know, I mean, my feeling has been that you know people have not been prepared for workshops, and look at it is a great deck. It's a top dog. There's no doubt about that. You know, it'd be foolhardy for me to say otherwise. But the deck is absolutely beatable, and I really think the metagame, the numbers we're seeing right now, are starting to show that people are figuring it out and maybe not cheating quite as much against the deck. Like, you know, the other night, it's never been easier post-Thorn Restriction to cast cards like Hurkyl's Recall and Energy Flux, and these cards are devastating, particularly Energy Flux against shops. So, yeah, things have acclimated, and you know, as they quite often do, they sort themselves out. So far, so good.
That makes sense. That was, I guess that's what I was thinking would probably happen after Eternal Weekend, right? That was definitely a statement to people saying, look, you must take this deck more seriously. Maybe you need Grudge in the main. Maybe you need, you know, more Energy Flux Hurkyls in the sideboard. So I was definitely curious to see what would happen as the metagame got a chance to react. And it sounds like, you know, maybe things are just okay. That would be cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I'm happy to chat more with you, but I do want to make sure everybody knows what's going on with VSL. This is the last week of the regular season, so this is week 9. We've got our last 4 players. You can see the matches crawling across the bottom of the screen. Dave Williams, Steve Menendian, Bob Maher, Aaron Campbell will be your 4 competitors tonight. And 3 of them still control their own destiny when it comes to playoff spots. Hopefully we can put the standings graphic up. You guys can see kind of exactly where things are right now. The magic number is 6 wins. If you can get to 6 wins on the season, 6-3 overall, you get to go to the postseason guaranteed. So we already have Reed Duke in. He's 8-1. He's clinched the #1 seed. He's all the way through to the finals. And you can see Eric Froelich and Kevin Cron are already on 6-3. So they get at least a tie for a playoff spot. But now let's look down a little further. Aaron Campbell and Bob Maher, if either of them goes 2-1 tonight, they join Efro and Kevin. They're in. Steven Menendian over there on the right-hand edge of the screen, if he goes 3-0, he's in. The place where things get tricky, though, is what if none of that happens? If none of those 3 players get to 6 wins, well, then that's really good news for Rich Shea. It could be that Reed, Eric, and Kevin are 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and 4th place is a massive tie at 5-4. You could, in theory, have all 4 of the players on the right half of your screen right now end the evening with 5-4 records, and then we get tiebreaker chaos. And I've got schedules and formats worked out for all the scenarios, but it might get a little crazy. But certainly going to be a super interesting night to see how this plays out. You know, can Steve run the table? Can he go 2-1 and hold on? And I know I've seen Rich Shea in chat. He has the sweat. He's going to spend the whole evening hoping nobody gets to 6 wins. Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting. I know Aaron and Bob play pretty early. They're up in the 2nd match of the night. So whoever wins, somebody has to win that match and get to 5 wins, guaranteed. And then it's like, okay, Rich needs to just root against that person, and needs the other person to only win once, and gonna be a nice home stretch. Definitely gonna be a nice home stretch. The first matchup, David Williams against Steve Menendian. So we get to see the start of Steve seeing if he can pull off the 3-0 or maybe the 2-1 and hope. David Williams doesn't have anything to play for other than getting out of last place, but I know he is eager to get out of last place. I also know he's eager to have some fun. I know he's been promising us a little bit of spice from his deck list. You got any predictions? You got any horses in this race you're pulling for, maybe?
I mean, the best player persevere. Yeah, that's you know, obviously I'm all joking aside. I mean, you know, Rich is my buddy, so I'd love to see him do well throughout the tournament. But tonight's players, best player, whoever comes out on top is deserves to be there. Yourself?
I like crazy chaos scenarios. I want the mass tie. I want to see the 5-4. Everybody get a mass tie. I think it's just we get to play more Magic. I'm always rooting for more Magic and ties, I guess.
So does that include yourself?
Oh, I'm out. I'm 2-7.
Okay.
So I put a little more emphasis on trying to play entertaining decks and maybe not necessarily the most competitive decks. So I actually thought my bargain deck was better than the 03 I got with it. I thought my Merfolk deck I thought it was better than 03, but between those two, I am well out of it. We didn't even put up the rest of the standings. The players who've been eliminated are sort of off the right-hand edge of the standings, including David Williams, who can get out a lot. I mean, if you're curious, last place right now is a tie between me and Paul Rietzel, both of whom are 2-7, but then Dave is 0-6. So 2-1, he crawls into the tie. If he 3-0s, he actually escapes the basement.
All right.
Sure,
let's have a night of drama then.
Yeah, all kinds of potential drama. Yeah, our first match should not be too far away. It will be David and Steve. Normal thing where nobody knows these deck lists for the first round. They're just going to play, and we'll see what happens.
Any predictions here, Randy? What we're going to see round one?
I got a sneak preview at the deck list, so
okay, all right.
Speculate. I will say, I'm looking forward to this evening. I think it's going to be fun. Menendian in particular has been promising spice.
Yeah,
he's been saying that he's got spice, and he wasn't lying. I've seen his list.
Well, I saw his.
It's pretty exciting.
I saw his tweets earlier, and for Steve to be tweeting out statements like that, what you gotta see this. Tune in tonight. This is on cards you've never seen on VSL in its history. So he certainly piqued my interest.
Fair enough. Yeah, looks like Dave and Steve are getting set up now, so shouldn't be too much longer. Mm-hmm. So, do you play much real world Magic? It sounds like you're basically a Magic Online player that bought into Vintage just for the sake of going to these Vintage tournaments, just for the sake of, is it just NYSE, Eternal Weekend, and Magic Online? Is that your whole thing?
No, it is for the most part. I mean, 90% of what I play is on Magic Online, if not more. But, I've developed a local play group here, or I've become part of a local play group in Toronto. And we've got in Vintage, probably somewhere between 10 to 20 players. And unfortunately, we only hook up once every 3 months is where we've been averaging the last few years. But we still get together, and we do have some smaller play groups where we, get 6 players out and, just get our feet wet playing Vintage cards, once a month type thing. But, I certainly have a great love for playing Limited. And so I do play a fair amount of that, doing sealeds and stuff in person. And,
nice.
And, so... every once in a while, it's nice to touch paper cards. As much as I love Moto.
Did you hit the Legacy at Eternal Weekend, or once you made top 8, did you just decide to play test?
Well, Randy, I knew I was going to make top 8, so I didn't bother signing up for the Legacy. But
wow,
I'm just kidding you. Do you know what? All joking aside, 2 years ago when I made top 8, I signed up for the Legacy, and I found myself feeling really spent after 2 whole days. Hard to do the Eric Virgo where you top 8 both of them, but I decided to just take it easy this year and do a little bit of cubing on the Saturday and keep my mind relaxed and
nice.
Get myself prepped up for Sunday.
What was the cube?
You have to ask Ryan Eberhardt. It was his cube, and anyways, yeah.
So the secret to winning Vintage Champs: don't play the Legacy, just do cube drafting on the side instead.
I don't know if that's advisable, but it was knowing what the top 8 was comprised of. With the workshops and the Oath Mirror, I didn't really feel like there was a whole lot of testing to be done. It's, as I'm sure you're aware, just relatively stock stuff when you've played a moderate amount of Vintage. So just keeping the mind clean was the plan.
Makes sense. Any particularly awesome games you played over the course of that run?
You know what? I certainly didn't have awesome games like Rich Shea had awesome games, like drawing 14 cards off of Grizzlebrand with workshops or Alpha Striking.
He did metamorph a Grizzlebrand in the semifinals. That happened. I was watching.
That's of epic proportions. But, I had some cool lines in the tournament, some really deep decision lines and things that in hindsight, having a chance to reflect were pretty cool. Like, I remember, I believe it was in round 9 up against a bug player, or round 8 against a bug player, and cast a precursor golem, and he gave it a lot of thought. He's either got force of will or he's got removal in his hand, and we made the decision to let it resolve. And the old sacrifice the precursor to my Ravager, and he was just kind of sitting there going, "Ooh, I guess I can't answer those 2/3/3 tokens anymore." So a couple lines like that. I remember one neat game where I was playing against UR Delver, and super tight game. I think I was at 9 life, and I was facing down a renowned Berserker and flipped Delver, and I don't remember what my opponent, I think he was at 10 life or something like that, but I had a decent board presence, and I had a Metamorph in my hand, so I knew he was going to put me to 3 life, cast the Metamorph, and I had the decision to copy his Delver or the renowned Berserker, and I copied the Berserker, and took the gamble, tacked in, nothing to block, renowned my Berserker. I think I left him at 1 life, and of course he couldn't burn me out.
Wow.
The only thing he could have done there was cast a haste creature, which was a risk, but I put a lot of thought into that particular play, and it was tight. And,
wow.
Ended up getting there. So yeah, and of course, round 9, Randy, you remember the winning in game where I stood up, and after that one, that was one of the most epic games of Magic I've ever had, hitting him with an 8/8 Steel Hellkite in turbulent waters.
Yeah, that match was crazy. And it was the end of a super long day too. I know you weren't happy with all the decisions you made, but you managed to sort of recover despite misreading, essentially missing his Ravager at the one point early in the game. But you got there.
Yeah,
what were your thoughts? What were your thoughts in the final? So game 3 of the final against Rich, he basically goes all in with a Ravager on like the 2nd or 3rd turn. Were you happy to see that because you thought you were going to win the race, or scared, or what was your thinking there?
Oh man, that match was over. What a great line by Rich. I beg your pardon, excuse me. It was really aggressive. But I mean, who's kidding who? He had me on a serious clock there, and I think I needed to get 2 blockers up in order to stay alive there. And Rich had disruption, I believe, in 2 wastelands. So he took my workshop, he took my academy, and I just was incredibly fortuitous. I mean, when I opened that hand, and I saw that Ratchet Bomb, I was like, "Oh Lord, what a awful card here," And the irony of it all is, of course, it ended up winning me the tournament. So, yeah, great line by Rich though. And to answer your question, I did not think I was going to win that game.
Interesting. Yeah, I thought it was a good line by Rich too. Almost got there, but it didn't. You were the champ. Thanks for hanging out and telling us your story. And why don't you hang out a little bit longer? We are ready to watch our first match of Vintage Super League. Andy and I will be right back.